And let's get ready for the next session. I'd like to request our student panelists for session 3 to please take their seats on stage.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. May I have your attention, please? Kindly take your seats and settle down. Now, to all the Gen Z, firstly, you have been a wonderful audience, I must admit that, from the last sessions. But can I make a request to each one of you? Earlier, when I spoke of the immense responsibility and how great people that you are. And I still mean it. But it looks indeed very awful if people have to come and persuade you to kind of move on and cooperate with the people in organizing things. You know, the kind of people who have come as guests to all of us from right across the length and breadth of the country. I would deem it a disrespect to them in case we do not cooperate and behave ourselves. Can I urge you to stay off screen during the talks, partake of the wisdom that is being given out by eminent speakers, and of course the panelists. And I do understand the requirement for bio break in case that is required. So, with the trust that you would abide by that, after the first session, we'll give you a 10-minute bio break. But can you come back within the time? Yes? No? Yes? Put up your hands if yes. I see some hands. Yeah. Wonderful. You're great students. I know the country is in great hands. So let's respect the word and cooperate. Thank you really very much. Without much ado, over to MC to start the sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Moving on, I'd like to invite on stage Mr. Jayant Krishna and Wing Commander Ragashri D. Nair. To moderate our third session, we are joined by a truly multifaceted leader, Wing Commander Ragashri Nair. A decorated veteran of the Indian Air Force, she served with distinction for over 15 years before retiring as Wing Commander. Her career in defense was marked by strategic thinking, discipline, and people-first leadership. She has held senior roles at DS Group and the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, and as Secretary of the Trivandrum Management Association from 2022 to 24, she played a key role in strengthening professional networks and policy advocacy. She continues to mentor startups through IIT Mumbai, BITS Pilani, VIT Chennai, and NITI Ayog's Atal Innovation Mission, and NITI Ayog, and has been honored with the ET Ascent Women Leader Award and the 100 Prime Women Icon Award. Please join me in welcoming Wing Commander Ragashri D. Nair to lead this session with her signature dynamism and vision. I now hand over to you, ma'am, to introduce Mr. Jayant Krishna.
Thank you, Anu. It was very kind of you. Generally, I'm on the other side. This time, I'm here. With that, good afternoon, all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce Mr. Jayant Krishna, a visionary leader with 38 years in distinguished career spanning industry, government, non-profits, and global think tank. He is widely recognized as a pioneer in India's skill development movement, having served as CEO, Executive Director, and COO of NSDC, where he spearheaded PMKVY, India's largest skilling initiative, and brought about historic apprenticeship reforms that reshaped vocational training in our country. Beyond skills, his contribution to policy and governance are remarkable. He worked closely with the advisor to the Prime Minister for 5 years, contributed to NITI Ayog's Employability Task Force, and played a pivotal role in the National Skill Qualification Framework, later ratified by the Union Cabinet. Mr. Krishna also played a global leadership role as Group CEO of UKIBC, strengthening UK-India economic ties, and as the founding CEO of Fast India, driving reforms in science and technology. A large part of his journey was with Tata Consultancy Services, where he held senior international leadership roles and transformed citizen services through the groundbreaking Passport Seva project. With over 250 published papers, 100 plus talks across the world, and visits to more than 75 countries, Mr. Krishna is a true thought leader on management, technology, governance, and international development. His contribution have been recognized with the APJ Abdul Kalam Award for Innovation in Governance in 2016, the prestigious Scholarship Schilling Scholarship and Fellowships of IMA and CSI. Beyond this, he has served as adjunct professor at IIT Kanpur and continues to mentor young leaders and organizations. If I were to capture his contribution to India in one word, I would use the word STAR. S for skill development that empowered millions, technology, T for technology-driven governance that transforms citizen services, A for advisory role in policy shaping national reforms, and R for reinforcing global relations through diplomacy, academia, and thought leadership. With that, it gives me immense honor to invite Mr. Jayant Krishna, a true star of India's leadership and development, to share his thoughts with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Wing Commander Nair, for such a kind introduction. And the STAR acronym had never occurred to my mind. So for inventing this for me, and your kind introduction almost sounded like a matrimonial biodata. But believe me, it doesn't do me any good, 35 years of being in married life. So wonderful being here. Thiruvananthapuram is the capital of Kerala, which is supposed to be God's own country. It's yesterday, after landing in Trivandrum, I thought, I'd still had a couple of hours before going for the dinner hosted by TMA. So I asked my driver to go towards, rather than going to the hotel, I thought I'll go to the Kovalam beach and enjoy the fresh breeze. Lovely place, absolutely, and I have when I was at the Tata Group, TCS had set up its corporate learning center here in Techno Park, So this morning, actually, I was there addressing their new, almost a similar crowd, about 900,000 people. And so happy to be here. I used to run a program on negotiations clinic, so which used to, for the emerging leaders, while I was with the group, and I used to come to the city almost every second or third month for 2 days. So lovely being here. I think bulk of my sensibilities as a human being, a star or whatever you said, Wing Commander Nair, notwithstanding, emanate from the Tata Group and the ethos of the group, kind of thing. So when you have opened your eyes virtually in the Tata Group, the entire value system gets shaped by what the group has been standing for. Can you hear me clearly, the last row? Can you hear me? Or is there an echo in the voice? No. You can, right? Wonderful. All right. So, Tata Group, if you look at Mr. Jamshedji Tata, who started the group, always used to talk about that in a free enterprise, community is not just one of the stakeholders in business. Community is the very purpose of existence of business. That's what he used to say. Business must exist for the community. And the wealth that gets created for the promoters is coincidental. It doesn't really matter. So, that's what his entire thing was, that in a free enterprise, community is not just one of the stakeholders, but the very purpose of existence of business, So that ethos somehow get into your DNA. And, Mr. J.R.D. Tata, who was the chairman of the group for almost 50 years before R&T took over, he used to talk about profits. See, even today in the Tata Group, 2/3 of the profits do not go to the Tata family, or, they go to the various philanthropic trusts. and it goes back, it's plowed back into nation building, So JRD used to talk about profits. He would say that what comes from the people must go back to the people many times over. So I think this ethos of the group of nation comes first, got imbibed into me. And first I joined Tata Sons. They had set up a division for management consulting in early 90s when the economic reforms spearheaded by the then finance minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, happened. So a lot of multinational companies were knocking the doors of the country and looking at opportunities, looking at scanning the environment, doing a market entry strategy for them, and so on and so forth. And at that point of time, the big four consulting firms had not set up their consulting shops in India at all. They were there for their audit and accounts practice, but they were not there for consulting. So Tata's thought the nation needs the service of such a competent core of consultants. And that is where virtually I opened my eyes as one of the 250 odd strong consulting cadre that created for business consulting, management consulting, whatever name you call it. And I had an opportunity to work at market entry strategies for a number of companies, many of the World Bank and ADB funded programs and initiatives and so on and so forth. And then after a few years of doing that, since I always had a flavor for technology, I got into TCS, which is the tech company and India's largest software services company. I went there and had an opportunity to spend time on several initiatives. But let me tell you, I've been their director, life sciences and healthcare, then complete responsibility for the top line and the bottom line. I've been their regional director for UK and Ireland. I've been the global relationship manager for one of the key customers that during my leadership became the fourth largest customers of TCS worldwide. But let me tell you, the greatest pride that I get is the passport seva automation, which happened at a global capability center, which I headed, And those of us, I can see Mr. Vora nodding, those of us who remember, having gone to a passport office before the restructuring happened, it used to be a shame. You used to think, is it a crime to be a citizen of India to go to such a center and get things done? Incidentally, Mr. Vora's, Ambassador Vora's, service, Indian Foreign Service used to run it, earlier. And, what a transformation it has. Today, a lot of people still, of course, I left TCS 10 years back, but a lot of people still come to me that, can you recommend? So I tell them the only difference between my recommending you to the local head or not recommending is that you will take 15 minutes in the normal course, and maybe if I recommend, it will take 17 minutes, because then the guy will offer you tea and coffee, So choice is yours. Any citizen can walk in and, you are treated with dignity, which was not the case earlier, So everything was hunky-dory for me in TCS. I had a fat package running into a couple of crores, which was that time very, very big compensation, kind of a thing. So that time, an opportunity came my way. Two things happened which changed the shape of my career and direction and so on and so forth. Dr. Manmohan Singh, when he was the Prime Minister, he had invited, a management guru called C.K. Prahlad from the University of Michigan to India under an initiative called India at 75. So the task given to him was that in the year 2022, when independent India becomes 75-year-old, what kind of country we would have or we need to have, and therefore the country starts, should gear up for that. This was the year 2006, 2007 kind of a time frame, And Tata Group, by design or default, they couldn't think of anybody, so they seconded me to work with him and help him in multiple measures, in terms of data about the economy and so on and so forth. And many things he said. He said, the country, if we want to become a worthwhile country by the year 2022, we need to have as many patents, as many intellectual properties, as many PhDs. He said even as many Nobel laureates we need to have, right? And as many PhDs, as many educated people. And he said 500 million skilled people will need. 50 crore, with 500 million skilled people we will need, you know. So, you know, that aroused my interest in the entire thing, that if this country, which today Prime Minister Modi talks about so openly, that his aspiration is that India becomes a developed country by the year 2047, when independent India becomes 100-year-old. It's a very worthwhile goal and aspiration for the country, you know. So we started working on that. And then as luck would have had it, my CEO, the TCS CEO, Mr. S. Ramadurai, he was picked up by Dr. Manmohan Singh, and he continued with Mr. Modi also later, you know, as his advisor for skill development. And he and Nandan Nilekani, Mr. Ramadurai and Mr. Nandan Nilekani, both were given the cabinet ministers rank for the roles they had in the skills and in Aadhaar sector. And at that time, there was no ministry for skill development at all. So what happened, I had, you know, he picked up some people from the Tata Group, maybe 3 people or 4 people, and said that, you know, since there's no ministry, you know, and such an important mission can't be housed in the then planning commission, so I want you guys to work as my crack team, you know. And so that is what I thought. Initially, 4 years, I was seconded by the Tata Group to work on the Prime Minister's Skill India mission. Was not given that name at that point of time. And I started working, and you'll be, you know, and the kind of freedom I got to operate, you know, in the sense they used to, I had an opportunity to work at reforming Apprenticeship Act, you know, and my work led to a new act of parliament. So how many people in the technology industry would ever get an opportunity to work on something, reforms, which gets passed by the parliament and it becomes a new law for the country, a new act of parliament, right? The National Skills Qualification Framework, we'd had an opportunity to, get it ratified by the Union Cabinet. So lots of these opportunities came my way. And then finally, when after 4 or 5 years, I get an opportunity, the then government requested Tata Group to second somebody to head the National Skill Development Corporation, which pretty much does 80-90% of the work the Skill India mission does, you know, or it's a nodal body, a public-private partnership, you know. So I joined them and I worked for them for a few years in 2 different capacities, the Chief Operating Officer and the Chief Executive Officer, and had the opportunity to work on lots of skilling initiatives. So the Skill India mission at that point of time, you know, let me tell you, it was the largest human resource development exercise ever undertaken by any country in the history of mankind. You know, if you have to develop 50 crore skilled people, and let me tell you, India was not taking skilling seriously. You know, before C.K. Prahlad came in and, you know, people like Mr. Ramadurai and I ventured into this area, you know, the country was skilling about 10 lakh people annually, you know. By the time we left, the country was skilling about 1 crore people annually, you know. So it was a 10-fold increase, you know. So I think a lot, but you know, this is such a huge task that the more you do, the more seems to remain to be done, you know. So I think the turning point in one's career is very, very important. And each one of us, let me tell you, gets brilliant opportunities in our lives, right? But the problem is, opportunity will not come and knock on your door and say, I am the opportunity, come and grab me. Opportunities always come brilliantly disguised as problems beyond solution, you know. Whenever you are saddled with a very sad phase of your life, if you look deeper, rather than getting carried away by it, getting depressed by it, you know, if you look deeper you know, you will always see opportunities, because opportunities never come, you know, knocking at your door. Opportunities invariably come disguised as problems beyond solution, you know. So I think that's very important. This is Trivandrum, so I don't know how many of you know a bit of Urdu or Hindi, but let me try, a very likable nazm of Faiz Ahmad Faiz, you know, which I always love, you know, about the passion to make the difference, passion to do something that is very, very meaningful. You know, he says, Gar bazi ishq ki bazi hai. This ishq is not the romance of a kind that the younger audience will be interested in, you know. This is the passion to achieve something worthwhile in life. गर बाजी इश्क की बाजी है, जो चाहे लगा दो डर कैसा, गर जीत गए तो क्या कहना, हारे भी तो बाजी मात नहीं. So what it essentially means is that, you have to be passionate about certain causes in your life, and it is worth spending a life for that. If you succeed, nothing like it. Even if you don't succeed, it is a journey well traveled. It's a path well traveled. So with that intention, my career took a U-turn almost 15 years ago or even earlier, and I started contributing value to the country. Then, after having spent almost 8-9 years in the skill development sector, initially on secondment and then joining the government, you can say that more as a lateral entrant, I thought that let me try something else. Then I joined a Silicon Valley non-profit, as their executive director for public policy in the country. And we started working at the behest of the current Prime Minister. We started working on reforms that can trigger job growth in the country, And, and finally, just before COVID happened, we made a presentation to the Prime Minister. He had initially given 45 minutes, but he cancelled his other meetings and was there with us for 2.5 hours and went through the entire presentation. And after that, COVID happened. He was very happy that a set of people have done some original thinking. But to our disappointment, COVID happened and nothing seemed to. He connected us to the education minister, to the labor ministry, to many other people, MSME ministry, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, it completely went into limbo. And to our utter surprise, we found, how many of you remember that Nirmala Sitharaman, the finance minister, announced reforms in 3 spurts sometime in the November-December timeframe of 2020. And you will be surprised that out of 12 reforms that we had, key reforms for creation of jobs which we had suggested, 8 of them were a part of the 3 pockets of reforms that she announced and declared that yes, our country is going ahead with that. Half of them were MSME related, so there were some other reforms as well. So I think a lot of us at some point of our stage in our life or career, we become complacent. He says, oh, in this country, nothing will happen. This attitude doesn't take you as far. There are certain doors which are very, very hard to knock and get anything out of it. But, persistence is something that pays, I have seen, at the end of the day. If you're well-intentioned, if you're not standing for a lobby, which will benefit a certain set of people, if you have the good of the country at your heart, people do hear, people do listen, and things do happen. Then after that, I joined the UK India Business Council as their first group CEO who was a non-Britisher. Otherwise, from their inception, the CEO used to be a Britisher based in London. I was the first Indian group CEO after a worldwide search, and I was based in Delhi. I did that, and last full-time role I did was, our economy has become, at that time economy was 6th largest economy. Now we are the 4th largest economy, and within a couple of years we'll become 3rd largest economy. But our economy is not driven by innovation. Generally, innovation happens in countries like, US, Japan, Germany, China, and so on and so forth. And we use that innovation, leverage that innovation for manufacturing or whatever else, right? So how does our economy doesn't remain a 4th largest or 3rd largest economy? How do we become one driven by innovation? With that aspect, we started, supported by a lot of people from MIT, from Harvard, from India itself. We started working on this foundation of advancing science and technology as its founder CEO. We had set it up and we were looking at big ticket reforms, so that India, of course it can't happen overnight, but once you improve the ease of doing research in the country, ease of doing science in the country, things will change. Things will, a lot of changes would eventually happen, We started working on that and now I'm very, very, happy. This morning I was there at Technopark campus of Tata Consultancy Services, and for good 2 hours I was talking to their young engineers who have joined that company, and how each one of them needs to embrace globality. I think that was the course of this thing. And so I think this is a journey, I could have been, once I was with the Tata Group, if good package, good house, good set of family, all amenities in life. Even if I had stepped down at that point of time, my TCS shares would have ensured that for the rest of the life I don't have to bother at all. But this is what behavioral scientists call as a problem of no problem. You're far too comfortable. So where the hell you see the problem? Everything is hunky dory. Why should you tread on a path which is less traveled, kind of a thing. But I think it is very, very important to seize these opportunities and look at how can you bring the difference, and with the fire in the belly, with the never say die attitude, right? Things don't happen easily in government, let me tell you. You have to knock multiple doors, you have to do multiple things. In corporate sector, I had the comfort of anything which is in the favor of business, it will happen. In government, things don't happen as well. But if you are persistent, if you are, if you have the good of the nation at your heart, right? There are, as I told you, the presentation we made to the Prime Minister, within a few months, 8 of those 12 reforms for job creation that we had suggested in our presentation to him were announced by the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. I mean, what more somebody can ask for? So I think it is extremely important to be passionate about it. And this life comes to us but for once, right? We can aimlessly keep on drifting through life or make the difference. This choice is ours, right? And all are something I would like to add for the technology industry that I have been a part of, right? In the early part of my career in TCS, right, when we used to go abroad, more than 30 years ago, when we used to go abroad for a business meeting or conference, right? Let me tell you, dissonance used to be written on the face of people. I didn't have to say that I am from India. My face tells that, right? And they used to wonder why the hell this Johnny has come from India, a country which is a nation of snake charmers and beggars. That's what people used to think about it. But believe me, with every passing year of my career in last 4 decades, I have seen how that perception about India has changed. And today, if you go for a business meeting, people take you very seriously because they think, oh, this set of Indians have come. They will bring some value proposition on the table that my company will not be able to say no to. People say that, you better pull up your socks, otherwise these Indians will come and take my jobs away. All this response of President Trump on, making the criteria for H-1B visa so difficult is nothing but an outcome of that, Indians today, their per capita income in the US as an Indian diaspora is almost 2.5, 3 times the average American income. So that's how well, 30, 35 years back, in a typical American household, if a spoiled brat is not having his meal, the mother would say, you better eat. Think of the starving millions who don't get 2 meals a day. In 30 years, 35 years, the change I have seen today, in a similar context, a typical spoiled American brat, when he's not studying in the US, the mother would think, you better study because there are millions of Indians and Chinese who are studying and they will make sure that you don't get a job. So how that entire perception of India as a country has changed, I've seen. And I take some degree of pride. I mean, politicians have done, bureaucrats have done, diplomats have done their bit. But I think a lot of credit goes to the technology industry of the country because the world, they are the window through which a major part of the business world at least looks at India as a country, I think. So I think, how much time, how am I doing on time? How much more time I have? Sorry? 10 more minutes. Oh, I have good time. Yeah. So I think this is what each one of us needs to do. Each one of us needs to look at. As I said, each one of you have brilliant opportunities in life. But the problem is these opportunities never come as opportunities. They always come brilliantly disguised as a problem beyond solution. Let me tell you a small story of a guy who was working in a company called Procter & Gamble, right? He was working in Procter & Gamble, and Procter & Gamble today we know as a company which is into FMCG products, shampoos, soaps, and so on and so forth, right? But that time, the premier product of Procter & Gamble used to be candles, wax candles, because there was no electricity, right? So, and the company was doing so well. They had 75% market share in the candle business, right? There was a young apprentice working there in that company, and he had this freak of doing research and development in a makeshift small lab, nondescript kind of a lab out of his garage, And one day he sort of not invented, but he came close to a concept and went and told Procter & Gamble management. He said, I have done something. Why the hell you are manufacturing wax candles? Wax candles is a end of the life cycle product, and it won't go on for long. And he said, he told his management, the general manager was a very, very senior person at that point of time. He said, I have done something, and this is something that glows. I'm still not fully into it, but I'm sure if we put some more research into it, it will become something that glows. You know what the general manager told me? Young man, I know you have, a lot of dreams in your eyes, but we are doing so well. We are our market position is so good. Our finances are so good. We have no business to get into these nonsensical products. You can leave and you can keep on doing it. He was a bit disappointed, but he carried on with his experiment in his garage, And after some couple of years, he perfected what he was developing. And, he became the inventor of electric lamp, the bulb kind of a thing. You know whom I'm talking about? Who? Thomas Alva Edison, right? The person who invented electric bulb. And the company that he started? He started GE, General Electric. Today, the market cap of GE is several times that of Procter & Gamble, So, why I repeated this short story, although it's not from my life, is to tell you that how opportunities come to each one of us in our lives. But the problem is opportunities never come, knocking at our doors that I'm here, come and grab me. They'll invariably come as a problem beyond solution, So I think, having said so, I think whatever we do in our life, right, we have to succeed. We have to earn our livelihood. That's a common denominator for most of us, right? But always think, what you could do, what's the value difference you can bring, right? Mahatma Gandhi, unfortunately, we are becoming a nation who's forgetting Gandhi, right? But Mahatma Gandhi used to have a talisman, And what he said in his talisman, he said, whenever you have doubt with yourself, whenever you are in doubt with yourself, try to imagine the face of the poorest of the poor person you have met, and then think, the action you contemplate taking, will it make any difference to his life? Will it, and all the doubt that you have with yourself would just vanish away, would just disappear, And so I think anything that you do, always, and we don't necessarily have to become CEOs of the company, whatever, even if you are in an entry-level job, or, struggling to make a career, still, can you bring some difference in the lives of underprivileged people? Maybe the person who's doing the utensils at your home, or somebody who's cooking, or the security guard, can you counsel their children to become more integrate them with the mainstream economy of the country? I think these things are very, very important because, ladies and gentlemen, this life, as I said, comes to you but for once. And choice is clearly ours. Do we want to drift through life, or do we want to make a difference? I think that's extremely important. And I'll end my talk and be open for Q&A in a short while. Wing Commander Nair will steer that process. As I end, having known that this is Kerala, but yesterday I was told Hindi is the third language that you have. So let me quote Kafi Azmi, and he said in one of his shares, and it said, let me recall, Koi to sood chukaye. Sood is principle, right? sood is interest. Sood is interest. Koi to, there's a loan you take and somebody prepays the interest. Interest is called sood. Koi to sood chukaye, koi to zimma le, us inqalab ka jo aaj tak udhar sa hai. So this is what, our motto in life has to be. You must make money, you must create wealth, but always think, can you travel that extra mile for those people who are lesser privileged than we are? And, you will find all the answers and you'll, each one of us, imagine you have gone to, for a funeral, right? Just try to imagine you have gone for a funeral. People are pouring in from all kinds of disciplines, Remember, look at their white clothes. Look at what they're talking about you, right? And then look a bit deeper. Think that it is your own funeral. As if you are watching your own funeral. What are people talking about you? People who have gathered at the funeral ground. How do they remember you? Do they remember you as somebody who had loving relationships? Do they remember you as somebody who had helped the lives of underprivileged? Do they see you as somebody who created value in life? Do they see you as somebody, who drifted through life, or somebody who brought all the difference, I think that's very, very important. And then go deeper. Try to write your own obituary. Write your own obituary. And this obituary is not of a person that you are today. This obituary is about the kind of person you would like to be remembered as after you are gone, right? So this obituary it can be very painful to write your own obituary, right, while you are alive, right? But write an obituary not talking about the kind of person you are today, but how you would like to be remembered as, right? And then look at what are the gaps. If I have to gravitate and become a person that I would like to be remembered as, what are the 3 steps we need to contemplate taking today, And those will not be urgent things in life. They'll be important things in our lives. And the irony of our lives is, day in and day out, we keep on drifting through things which are urgent in life, right? At the cost of things which are far more important in life, right? So I think know the difference and do this small exercise and figure out what the gaps are and what are those delta steps you contemplate taking if you want to become closer to the kind of person you would like to be remembered as. And believe me, there'll be a transformative change in your life. There'll be a huge differential you'll be able to bring about, I'll end there and would be open for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we start the question answer session with the student panelist, I have a question to ask. You had a flourishing career in TCS, and what is the one thing that made you step into social sector? I heard a lot of aspects that you mentioned, but I just want you to highlight one aspect for which you stepped into social sector to serve the Indian government and the country, of course.
So I think, I was drawn into, as at TCS, I was also a volunteer over and above my day job. So over and above my day job, I was also a volunteer into corporate social responsibility. And Mr. F.C. Kohli, who was the first CEO of TCS and also regarded as the father of Indian IT industry, whom the nation lost a couple of years ago, he, when he retired from TCS, he tried to contribute and give back. And he started looking at what are the core problems of the country that country suffers from, why we are not becoming a developed country. Among other things, he said illiteracy or a poor degree of literacy is the prime reason, And he said, he studied the Government of India National Literacy Mission's program that, which uses almost 200 contact hours of learning before an illiterate person can become functionally literate, And, what he studied deeper, he found that 200 contact person for a rural housewife or for a farmer or, for a laborer in the fields, it is too much and the people run out of steam. They spend 40 hours and then they get dropped out.
So he said, how do we condense that time? So he did not reinvent the wheel. He used the same Government of India, National Literacy Mission's curriculum and automated it. See, TCS used to junk all computers in 3 years' time and replenish with a new generation of computers. So he used the old computers and digitized these books and created voiceovers, created, puppetry, created, voiceover, pictures and so on and so forth, because of which these 200 contact hours could be compressed into 40 to 50 contact hours, right? So I started working at that, and that is what, ignited the passion for corporate social responsibility and doing something different rather than just keep on being in the rut of corporate sector. I think that is very, very important. And so after 40 to 50 hours instead of 200 hours, a person could become functional literate. Functional literate, what it means, he wanted to change the definition of literacy. He said, as long as you can read the vernacular newspaper, he also did some research and said that as long as you can read full words, not letters, full words, you only need to know some 900 to 1,000 words to be able to read a newspaper, for a mother to be able to fill up a form of the child, or enroll yourself in Ayushman scheme of Government of India, and so on. So, of course, that time there was no Ayushman, but in today's perspective, I'm telling you. So you become functionally literate. I think that became a game changer for me, and and then C.K. Prahlad, as I said, his India at 75 mission, and then Mr. Ramadurai, being taken as his advisor to the Prime Minister in the rank of a cabinet minister and steering So I think these three were the stimulants which, because of which I decided last 15 years of my career and life, I'll give it for nation building rather than, earning more and more and more money in the corporate sector.
Now I'll ask the student panelists one by one. I'll just divide it into 4 sections for the ease of you to answer it. So we will divide it into skill development and youth employability, which will be asked by Harsha and Lena. Policy and international relation by Reshmi and Devdutt. Technology and governance, Ravi Shankar and Agni. Leadership and mentorship, Abhirami and Radhu Pillai. So I would ask Harsha to start.
Good afternoon, sir. Harsha Ramesh from Asian School of Business. Sir, how do you see
This is the one which is at Techno Park.
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Sir, how do you see the future of India's skilling ecosystem evolving in the age of AI and automation?
See, one thing which, I have spoken to, I was speaking to Mr. Jayant Chaudhary, who is the current Minister of State for Skill Development. I said one reason, during COVID, what happened, a lot of multinational companies were knocking, they were looking at destinations other than China to locate their supply chains, right? I'm not saying they were moving all investments away from China because it's never that seamless, but all additional increments happen additional investments happen in other countries, right? And India was a forerunner to grab those opportunities, right? Some of those investments like Apple, for example, Apple iPhones are manufactured in India now big time. After China, we are the second largest manufacturer, right? But the fact is, as many opportunities did not come our way. One reason is that we did not leverage Industry 4.0 technologies. They did not get to our ITIs or skill development or even higher education ecosystem. Tell me, you name a few institutes where we teach artificial intelligence, for the sake of completing the curriculum they teach. But telling you how to use ChatGPT is not AI. That anybody can use, right? Kind of a thing. Research into artificial intelligence, research into adaptive algorithms, research into 3D printing, research into, Internet of Things. These kind of things, which is very, very important. I mean, I once had an opportunity, of course, now I don't meet the Prime Minister because I'm no longer in the government, but once I had at an NDTV event, I did mention that you have to set up a mission for, Industry 4.0 technologies, their adoption in schools, in colleges, IITs, ISC, NITs, and even, ITIs and polytechnics and so on and so forth. It's very important. If I were the Prime Minister, I would do it. I would consider this as the first priority of the nation. It's very, very important. Otherwise, you mentioned about AI. You'll know by next year, the code, I'm talking about the software code, the total code which is generated by AI would surpass the code being developed by programmers. You know, can you imagine? The AI-generated code by end of next year would overtake in quantum the code being done by programmers. So what will happen? You know, so but let me tell you, AI one should not always look at as a threat. Yes, there's a threat to existing jobs, but newer jobs would also emerge. The only problem is we as a country, we are still not preparing ourselves the way we should for those new generation jobs. The reasons are two. One is contours of those new generation jobs are still not fully known because it is evolving. And secondly, I think we have to do it. We have to believe that, that adopting those technologies in higher education and skill development can make eventually our youth more employable, and we'll be able to solicit far more FDI into the country and far more opportunities for people who don't want to lay all eggs in the Chinese basket by way of manufacturing. I think we'll become the front runner there. But we have to do it on a war footing, because the time to do it is now. You know, this so-called talk about demographic dividend happening to India. Demographic dividend, in other words, is so that we ensure that the country's population does not remain a curse, it becomes a blessing for us, right? So this is not an endless window of opportunity. Our population growth rate has fallen already. And in 20 to 25 years, the growth rate would become negative, which would mean our population would start reducing from 140 crore, what we are today, right? So we have to act with a never before velocity. That's very, very important.
Lena from CET School of Management. So, what key reforms are still required to bridge the gap between education and employability in India?
So, let me slightly digress your question. What key reforms are required in the country as a whole, right? And it will also impact, I think, okay, let me answer since you talked about skills in education, right? The first is apprenticeship or internship should become, 6-month apprenticeship or internship should become an integral part of all programs, right? No degree can be given unless you have soiled your hands on the shop floor or in the office for a minimum period of 6 months. It's very, very important. Because believe me, in a 3-year degree course, what you would not be able to get, you'll learn more in the 6 months of apprenticeship. So, but that apprenticeship has to be of a kind that there is a 6-month window in the program itself. There should be no school lessons in the university or in the college during that time, right? I think that's very important. Second is vocationalization of secondary education, right? Why in this country, why is it that education is valued so much and skill development is looked upon that? Skills are not considered to be aspirational career for people in the country, right? So I think it's very, very important that, we do the vocationalization. And if you have a Kerala State Education Board, why shouldn't we have a skilling scheme right from class 9 onwards, so that by the time the child does class 12, he has a full associate degree or a diploma equivalent of skills also, right? I think it's very, very important. And then we as a country, we have to start giving respect to skilled people. I think that's very, very important. And compensate them well. That's another problem. See, industry cries through a prism of timelessness, saying that, we don't get skilled people. But when they want to pay them the same salary as the unskilled people. So how would it happen, I think this is a country which is waiting for 1 million mutinies to happen. It's not easy, but, and we have to be in a nation, we have to be a nation in a sense, with a huge urgency. The velocity of decision making has to be much fast. Any reform, if our rank in ease of doing business was 64th, I'm just digressing from education and skills, right? We are the 4th largest economy. Why shouldn't our ease of doing business also not be 4th best in the world, right? I think there are lots of questions. I can go on another talk I can deliver on this, but not today.
Good afternoon, sir. Reshmi from Asian School of Business. What role can UK and India collaboration in strengthening India's education and innovation ecosystem?
So, I think one difference, education and innovation ecosystem, you said, right? So I think one difference between China and India, Chinese economy is 6 times bigger than ours, right? Their GDP is six and a half times bigger than ours, right? The only reason I see is, of course, there's a dictatorship versus democracy. That debate is always alive. But China did its economic reforms. They started the process in 1978, 79. 1978, 79. India did it in 21 years. So there was a 12 to 13 year phase lag between the reforms, economic reforms undertaken in China and in India, right? But the good thing is, China, because the kind of governance model that they have, good or bad, that's a different debate. There was a continuity in the entire thing, right? After the initial success of these economic reforms, the nation created more wealth, more manufacturing they started doing, and then they plowed back a substantial part of the wealth that they created into education and science and technology areas, let me talk about science and technology research itself, No official data is available from China, but I am told almost 6 to 7% of their GDP they were spending in science and technology research and development, And therefore, and in our case, our reforms were also successful in 91. But the government, after completing its 5-year tenure, the government fell. And then there were, coalition governments for 2-3 governments were coalition governments. Then another BJP government came. Then it fell within no time, within 1 year or whatever it is. So there was a lack of continuity and lack of a political consensus to plow back that wealth the country created into education and science and technology, which China did big time. And China today, look at you. Somebody had mentioned about AI, right? US is the country where AI started, right? Now the research happening in China has overtaken that happening in the US for AI, right? Because they use those crucial years in the nation building to do up, their education system and all. When I say education, primary, secondary, college, university, technical, all education, all levels of education. I think that's very important. We also came up with the new education policy, but somewhere I see we have a lack of seriousness in the way it is being implemented and rolled out. I think so that difference is causing, So if we as a nation, we spend 0.64% of our GDP on science and technology, right? As low as that. All other countries spend 2.5% to 5% of their GDP. Israel, such a tiny country, they spend 4.5% of their GDP on science and technology research. Why India spends 0.64%? We have to put more money into it. That's very important, and improve the ease of doing science, ease of doing research in the country. That's very, very important. Today, tell me, PhD is supposed to be. I'm sorry to say that if there are some in this crowd, but barring a few exceptions, PhD is supposed to be the last refuge of people who have not got a job to write NET, whatever it's called, right? I mean, that exam and get some scholarship and start doing it, So PhD can't be the last refuge of unemployables, right? The best in class brain has to go into research and so on and so forth, I mean, it's a subject I can speak for an entire day, but it's...
Good afternoon, sir. Devatapi from CT School of Management. Sir, having worked with think tanks like CSIS, what global best practices do you think should India adopt for social...
Sitting next to you, I can't hear.
Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. So, hello?
There's too much of echo. We can't hear.
You at least don't use the mic and tell me so that I will repeat the question.
So, being worked with...
Don't use the mic.
So, having worked with global think tanks like CSIS, what global best practices do you think India should adopt for a social, science and technological reform?
Good question. Since, I am a senior fellow of a global think tank called CSIS, he says what best practices India should follow. I think best practices come later, but fundamentally a course correction is required. We spend 3% of our GDP on education and skill development. What countries do? Any country, all other G20 countries spend anywhere between 6 to 10% of their GDP on education, right? Healthcare, we spend 2.1% of our, the public expenditure, government expenditure. Private sector is different. The government expenditure of 2.1% of our GDP we spent on healthcare, right? all other countries spend between 6% to 12% of their GDP on healthcare, right, kind of thing. Science and technology, I just gave the data, 0.64% versus anywhere between 2.5% to 4.5%, 5%, you know. So I think this course correction is required, right? That's very, very important. You know, that's what my quarrel is. I love the aspiration of the Prime Minister that India should become a developed nation by 2047. But how will it become? Where is the roadmap? Where is the course correction happening, right? That's very, very important, right? That's, I think the reform centricity is so important. It's so important. You know, I think we have to be paranoid about reforming the country. Anything which is blocking, you know, the progress of the country on healthcare, education, soliciting industrial investments, I think we have to be paranoid, you know. The people, you know, in the PMO who do, you know, multiple things, they have to be paranoid about, reforming the country in multiple ways. Because this opportunity will not be there for India for all times to come. If we don't act now, we would have missed the bus for all times to come, leave aside becoming a developed country by 2047. Labor reforms. Look at, you know, while in Government of India there was some effort made for labor reforms. But look at the state level where these inspectors and these Johnnies come and make the lives of industrialist, MSME units miserable, right? I think all that has to change, you know.
On technology and governance, for lack of time, I'll ask both of you to ask one after another. So you start, Ravi, and then you continue.
Good afternoon, sir. Ravishankar V from...
Tell me, if I can't hear you sitting next to you,
Yeah,
how would you make a public speech and make 1,000 people like this listen to you?
Too much of echo.
Ravishankar V from... Ravishankar V.
No, that's his name. Who asked the
That's your name.
From CT School of Management. And being the leader of Passport Seva, what all lessons have to be implemented for people-centric areas in digital services?
Good question. He says since TCS did the Passport Seva automation, complete transformation, so what are the essentials there, right? I think in any process of the government, there are multiple steps required, sub-processes involved, right? You identify what are the core processes and value-adding processes and what are non-core and non-value-added processes, right? And don't look at incremental improvements here and there that we'll fix that, we'll fix that. You know, you redefine, do the business process re-engineering in a form as if you are fundamentally reinventing the wheel. If a new passport issuing office has to be created, what all it should have? Taking care of all the sovereign requirements of the government and yet the ease of the citizen in mind. And completely recast the process. If TCS had studied the existing process of Ministry of External Affairs in passport, right? And we would have automated that as it is. Believe me, only 20% improvement would have come. So we, along with the government, we reimagined that how the new set of processes should be and then went about automating. So that is what you have to re-engineer the processes and remove all non-value added processes, sub-processes.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Agnipi Dinesh from Asian School of Business. How should India balance rapid tech adoption?
Rapid
Tech adoption
technology adoption.
with a concern of inclusivity and digital divide.
And digital divide. See, digital divide, you know, a lot of people say that, you know, a lot of e-governance initiatives of the government where there's a technology-based service available to people. How does it happen? How does it address digital divide, right? You know, when people, a significant percentage of population is illiterate, or though they don't have access to smartphones and so on and so forth. So would it not widen the digital divide? Let me tell you, through a prism of timelessness, we can keep waiting for the rest of the India to become educated and literate, first of all, and then educated, and have access to smartphones, right? You know, even if I met a farmer, you'll be surprised at the airport in Bangalore. So the farmer flying, kind of a thing. And he was not a big farmer. It was a middle-level farmer. It was his first flight. He said that I use this to track the prices of tomatoes in the mandi. So he may... Hello. So to track the prices of tomato in the mandi and then sell my tomatoes at a mandi which gives a higher price, kind of a thing. So I think, we can keep on waiting that everybody will be literate first, then educated, have access to smartphones. These battles will keep on happening concurrently. And as people would realize that the only way to exist and survive is through the digital technology, things will change, let me tell you on ease of doing business itself, right? We used to be 110, 120, suppose as very, very bad ranking. The Prime Minister took it up as a personal challenge and it improved to 63 or 64. Still not good enough, right? But this change happened because a lot of approvals were made online using e-governance, right? I think that's the only way, let's not hide behind a digital divide and so on and so forth. We have to the show has to go on, right? Even if we can't help 100% of the population, even if 90% of the population, now we have smartphones. Last count, I think almost 100 crore smartphones out of 140 crore people. 100 crore people have smartphones now. It's not a small number, right? What percentage it becomes? A very significant percentage of our population has access to smartphones.
Afternoon, sir. You have worn multiple hats across government, non-profit organizations, and corporate. So how do leadership skills need to access or adopt on these contexts?
On these multiple roles, across the multiple roles. So leadership, essentials of leadership do not change whether you are in the corporate sector or you are in a non-profit sector or you are in government. Essentials of leadership remain the same. The only difference is in government, perception about your work is perhaps more important than the value you have brought on the table. In corporate sector, it is the core performance, even if your perception is not very good, the value you bring on the table matters more than the perception of how you have fared in the government. That's the only difference. Otherwise, I think, there's not much of a difference. Essentials of leadership, basically at the end of the day, you have to be a good human being. You have to be driven by certain values in life. And those values do not change materially whether you are in the government, in the private sector, in a think tank, in a non-profit, wherever you are. Those values don't change much. Although the requirement of those sectors are different, as I said, that in government, the perception about your performance and perception that you are on the right side of your boss is more important than the core throughput itself. So those issues are there.
Good afternoon, sir. Radhu Pillai from CET School of Management. Sir, what advice would you give to young leaders who are aspiring to work at the intersection of policy, technology, and social impact?
That's a large cross-section. Policy, technology, and social impact. Right, yeah. So I think one important thing is that the human side of the technology should never be lost sight of, right? Whatever you do, but any technology which is not socially relevant, any technology which doesn't add value to the people, it gets into a self-defeating cycle, right? I think that's very, very important. So technology must have a human face, That's very, very important, and that should be leveraged. That thought has to be leveraged in whatever we do at the policy stage or in the execution stage. That's very important, right? Everywhere, is adoption of this technology going to change the quality of life of our people? I think that has to be the cornerstone of our any decision making by the policymakers or in the government or wherever, kind of a thing. I think that's very, very important. Otherwise, technology for the sake of technology, to my mind, makes no sense at all. Technology must have a human face where it either adds value to the government, to the business, or it adds value to the people. Ideally, it should add value to both the segments.
Thank you, Mr. Jain Krishna. It was wonderful for sharing such rich insights. And as the audience will agree that this is a man who's sitting here, which goes exactly by the poem that I am very fond of Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. He did give two nazm, if I can say, and he said because it is the third language of Kerala, I think I should repeat what you said. One was, Gar bazi ishq ki bazi hai, jo chahe laga do dar kaisa, gar jeet gaye to kya kehna, haare bhi to bazi mat nahi. Am I right?
बहुत खूब, Subhanallah.
But apart from that, the plethora of experience, whether be it in TCS, whether be it in various roles, various hats that he had worn, one takeaway of this session is opportunities always come as disguised as problem beyond solution. And therefore, we all have to be prepared that whenever there is a problem, it is an opportunity. And whenever there is a challenge, it is an opportunity for you to flourish. The question answer session was handled by giving orientation on when it was about skilling, about apprenticeship, where it should be made mandatory for 6 months so that everybody is skilled at a very base level itself, and vocationalization should be given importance in our education system. As far as policy development is concerned, he mentioned about examples of China in education, science and technology, and reforms. We should be paranoid as far as bringing India into the forefront. As far as technology and governance, the core value and non-core value segmentation, and to redefine people-centric services, where approvals which has been made online, because of which the governance has come forward in ease of doing business and other segments. Leadership, that was the last question which was asked by both of them, where the one line in which I can sum up is values don't change, perception and value, and technology which is not socially relevant, and there should be a human face for that. With that, I conclude the session. Thank you so much. Though we overshot a little bit, I am sure all of you would know that because of the echo, a lot of things we couldn't hear, and there was some amount of time lag in that, and I apologize on that behalf. I thank IMA and Trivandrum Management Association for giving us this opportunity to speak, and thank you very much, Mr. Jain.
Thank you. I loved being here.
Thank you, Wing Commander Ragashri, for leading with such dynamism and heart. And thank you, Mr. Jayanth Krishna, because your journey and insights have certainly reminded us that courage and commitment and creativity go hand in hand. To honor our speaker, Mr. Jayanth Krishnan, for his inspiring contribution, we would now like to present a small token of appreciation. May I request Wing Commander Nair to do the honors. I now call upon Mr. Madhav Sharma to present the memento to Wing Commander Ragashri as a token of our gratitude.
I must confess, when I go for programs like these, I generally leave the memento in my hotel room, never carry it back. But this is so beautiful. I bet it carried back with me.